Welcome to another episode of Video Store Rejects. This is a podcast where we discuss directors' filmographies and our favorite film franchises, which today's episode, I guess, kind of crosses both of those thresholds. And we have a returning guest, Colin Smith. Welcome back, Colin.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And I remember you had posted a thing, I think over a year ago, about Ridley Scott being over 80 years old, and here he is making two movies that are coming out, and like, how's he doing it? And like, he's got another movie coming out, which possibly might come out sooner because we were just talking off record that Avatar's coming out, and it looks like they've like kind of cleared the release schedule for the end of the year after Avatar. So they're teasing that maybe Napoleon will drop on Apple TV to get like awards recognition, possibly.
Wow, that would be interesting.
But you came on and we talked. We had a great conversation, even though it was three guys talking about Thelma and Louise. But it's a phenomenal film, and you had picked that film. But then you had messaged me and is like, has anyone picked Prometheus? If they have not picked Prometheus, I want it. I don't care. I want to talk Prometheus. So I was like, okay, yeah. Because if you're that passionate, which there was someone else who asked about it, and apparently like this is that kind of movie. People either love this movie or they think it's some pretentious piece of doo-doo. Like that's tends to be the reaction of it. So what is it about this movie do you like, and are you a fan of the Alien franchise, or did you like that it went in a different direction, even though it was like Ridley Scott coming back to not only the franchise he sort of helped create, but like the film that made him a name filmmaker?
Yeah, I'd say yes to all of that. I am a fan of the Alien franchise. I actually like all of the Alien films in one way or another, some more than others. I can't say that about the Alien versus Predator movies, but if you just take the Alien movies, I can say I like all of them in different ways. I'm also a fan of Ridley Scott, even though he's made a lot of. He makes so many films; they don't all speak to me either. But a number of my favorite films are his, including the first Alien. And yeah, I did like him returning and going in a different direction, and maybe. I find that one of the things I like about Prometheus is that it both feels very much like a return to Alien in a lot of ways, but also very much feels like going in a different direction. And I think I love the balance of of those two feelings.
I I would agree with you. And I want to go on a side tangent just a little before we get fully into the movie, is because I just did a David Fincher ranking, and watching Alien 3 and Prometheus kind of close together within a week of each other, I'm like, these movies have not necessarily similar themes, but like they have similar like reactions to people. Like people tend to be one way or the other on the film. I think the critical response for Prometheus was a little higher than Alien 3 at the time. But like the people that like the both movies are like, no, this movie's actually really good. They both deal with kind of returning to the horror elements of the franchise, because Cameron's version was very much an action movie. And I'm with you. I kind of enjoy all six of these movies in the main franchise. I can't really vouch for AVP. I mean, the first one's kind of okay, but yeah, there's something in all six of these films that I think is interesting. I think it's hard to top the first two because they're kind of master classes in
Yes.
their respected genres. But I think Prometheus and Alien 3 kind of are right under them. Like they're not masterpieces, but there's like a lot more there than people might initially want out of this movie. But I think with Prometheus, I think the hype of it being like, oh, it's Ridley Scott, he's coming back to Alien, it's a prequel to Alien. I think a lot of people were wanting it to be closer to the Alien franchise. And Ridley Scott was like, yeah, you remember that big giant alien dude that was on the ship? I want to know about those guys. What were they up
Right,
to?
right. Yeah, well, and maybe that's one of the reasons I like, because I also that question has been in my mind. I'm gonna jump on that little tangent for just a little bit, just to say that I love Alien 3 and I will defend it. It's a hill I will die on. I think it's incredible. I agree, it's not the same tier as the first two films, but I think it's really close, and there's so much about it that I love. There was a period of time when I first saw Resurrection when I didn't like it, but over the years I've come to see what makes it a great film too, and I really now appreciate it. I think I would love to see Ridley Scott be able to, if it's his desire, finish this sort of Prometheus Covenant trilogy. And I mean, I don't know if we'll ever get that based on sort of, how things have gone, or if he even sort of cares to do it. And in some ways, the ending of Covenant is a good ending, that it just sort of leaves you on in a really disturbing place. But at the same time, there's a part of me that would love to see, where if he wants to finish this chapter of that story, and David's story, maybe it is, I don't know. But it's I it, I'm going all over the place here, but yes, Alien 3 is one. I know we're not here to discuss it, so I'll drop it here, but I will just want to say Alien 3 is an excellent movie, and I enjoy watching it. It's one of the ones that I enjoy the most when it's about to come on. I think more than Aliens, when I'm starting it, I get more like, "Ooh, I'm excited to watch this again." Even though I recognize that, as I said, the other films are all excellent too. So,
Have you seen the assembly cut of it?
oh yes, I've seen a
Yeah.
few. Yes, I like. I like. Yeah, I like them. I like all the things that Fincher was doing in
Yeah,
there.
and my final note on that is, and this is what I tell people, because I know like why some people initially didn't like it because of what it did. He kind of pulled a Ryan Johnson back in the day.
Right.
But I think it's amazing if you like watch the documentary, or like the behind the scenes of like what he had to go through to make this movie, and like how the studio kind of micromanaged it. It's amazing that he got the movie he did, and that now that you can go back and look at like all his other movies, how it still very much feels like it belongs in his filmography, even though he kind of disowns it. Like if, and especially that assembly cut, you can tell it's a Fincher movie.
Yeah, I'm kind of sad that he has disowned it, because of how much I do love it and how much I see of the things that I like about him and his work in it. I also think it's it may be my favorite of Weaver's Ridley performances. Like,
It's truly a great performance, and she's surrounded by like top-notch actors. Charles S. Dutton is great. Paul McGann, especially in the assembly cut, because there's a whole side plot and like with him and like the alien that makes more sense. Charles Dance, Brian Glover, like there's just Pete
yep,
Postlewaite. There's like a lot of
yeah,
really solid actors and performances in that movie, and
yeah.
like Prometheus, it goes back to the horror elements that the original film was rooted in.
Well, and speaking of bringing it back to the film we're here to talk about, speaking of the cast, oh my God,
Hmm.
we've got this amazing cast with, of course, Numi at the center of it, but it's an ensemble piece for sure. And again, like Alien, it's the female characters who are the strongest. I mean, her and Charlize Theron are just stunning in this, and so complicated. And every time I watch it, I find their characters so, especially Charlize, like her character becomes, I think, just so interesting, and her performance of it so fascinating as the movie goes on. She could have easily been a one note character, but she's not in any way. Um, And just the rest of the cast too. Like I'm just looking at the list here, and I'm just thinking, wow, all these people were in this movie.
Yeah, some of them before like American audiences knew who they were, like BD Wong,
Yep.
Benedict Wong is in
Yep.
this. Benedict Wong, sorry.
Yes. Right.
Yeah,
Yes.
before
BD
because
Wong's
I
in the Jurassic Park
right,
franchise, not this
wrong
one.
actor. Thank you. I apologize. I got the names. Benedict Wong, yeah,
Mhm.
and Idris Elba, which he might have been known to some Americans had they watched The Wire, but
Right.
like he's just an actor that keeps people keep finding in different things.
Right.
But yeah, Charlize is great in this movie, and what's interesting is she was approached to play Dr. Shaw, but she couldn't do it because of scheduling conflicts. And so when her schedule freed up, she got cast as Vickers. And like you said, she could just be the one note military, I'm in charge of the operation. But there's so many layers. Like she doesn't really want to be there. So you kind of get her attitude towards the whole mission. But then as the plot unravels, you see why she doesn't want to be there. But also she's trying to prove to when we eventually find out Guy Pearce, who plays Wayland. So
Yep.
there's the connection. He's the founder of the Wayland Corporation, which I guess hasn't merged with Utani yet.
Right.
And like she's also trying to prove that she can handle the business and take over, but like he refuses because he doesn't want to die. So he's like he wants to live because
Right.
so many people because this movie is about life and death
Yeah.
and
And
creation.
successions and how we pass things on and how we resent what the previous generations have done, and like it's reflects on a lot of fascinating things about lineage and how that defines who we are, and or how we try to break free of that. Yeah.
But yeah,
It-
Charlize could be a villain, but she's not really a villain or a hero. She's kind
right.
because like once stuff hits the fan, she's like, I'm out of here.
Yeah. That's true. You're right, she's a complicated character. She's interesting because she doesn't fit into any sort of neat box, and her performance is, I mean, she's one of the greatest actors of her generation, and she's showing it here, like even in a franchise film, in an ensemble where there is a lot of great actors. She's there. Like I think between her and David, and Michael
Mm,
Fassbender's performance, like I find them the most fascinating um, characters in the film for sure, especially in light of what we learn in Covenant about David. He's really fascinating to watch, sort of coming back to this one again
yeah, I
and watching
mean,
where it all comes from.
I guess he's technically the villain in this in a way. I mean, we learn more about that in Covenant, but like he's got ulterior motives from the beginning. But Michael Fassbender does such an amazing job of making the David not only haunting and curious, but like you just never know what he's up to, but he always has the upper hand.
Well, unlike a good villain, um, he you can relate to his motives to a certain degree, right? Like the film helps you understand his point of view and where he's coming from and why. And he's probably less of a villain in this one than he sort of becomes full on in Covenant. The but in this one, I think there's still this sense of sort of and again, like Ridley Scott building it, like both making a brand new movie that is separate and stands on its own and explores new things in a new direction, but also tying into the mythology of the franchise and the emotions from the franchise. I mean, coming as a fan of the franchise, you don't know how to feel about these androids because we've had them be the full-on villain, we've had them be a hero, and so David is uh, again so complicated, and not especially if you just take this story. I'm not sure we know how to feel about him and his feelings. In many ways, I think there's so many times when the movie makes you see his point of view and just how shitty humans treat him, right?
Well,
Or the way that he's viewed by the humans, and how that might make someone feel if they were in that role.
right. You get why he infects Logan Marshall Green's character, who a lot of people refer to as low rent Tom Hardy,
Yes.
because he's kind of a jackass. Like, I don't
Yeah.
like his character at all. He feels like a bro to me very much. Like, he
Yeah.
doesn't even act like a scientist to me. And like, he's insulting David left and right. He's like, "Why do you need a helmet? You don't
Right.
breathe."
He
And
keeps trying to point out that David's like he's like that sort of that kind of school bully who maybe doesn't outright like push you down and beat you up, but like is constantly trying to point out that you're different, that you don't fit in, that make other people sort of view you differently and in a not good way. That's the way I sort of read his character in this, is that he's that kind of insecure person who has to like make somebody else be further out so that he can feel better about himself.
well, and I mean, he's even kind of snide to Shaw and Naomi Rapace's character about
Mm.
her like belief in Christianity and God, because her dad was a missionary, so she has a fairly strong belief structure. Which I know, they like, oh, scientists and
Mm-hmm.
religion don't ever cross, but like they can, and like
Well, in
that's
this case, I think that's a big part of what the movie is saying in a way. Like she never gives up her faith, even though she, is potentially discovering things like as a scientist, reaching conclusions that some people would say challenge her faith, but she always finds a way to reconcile that. Um, so I think the movie is wrestling with the fact, is this really a dichotomy, or is this potentially something more complicated, that these things can live in harmony with each other, maybe more cohesively than we often like to think. And you're right, I mean, he is an unlikable character, from the way he treats David, but also from the way he treats her. I think there's he again seems to be that kind of male character that has failed to a certain degree, and then takes his frustration with that out on others.
hmm
But again, not in a full-on villainous, bad guy
yeah,
way.
it's very passive aggressive. He's not
Yeah.
full on. Well, because I think, before, Me Too blew up in society, we thought of abusive men as just these dark, lurking figures that came out of the dark, or that they
Right.
were very abrasive and loud. And, obviously you could see the signs. In reality, it's really more manipulative, and people who come off as they might be nice, but there's always like a lingering darkness there, and very passive aggressive in their
Yeah.
behavior.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah, I think he's a well-drawn character that way. And which makes, again, like you said, brings some motivation for why he's experimented on by David.
yeah, because, I'm sure David doesn't think much of a lot of humans, because of how he's treated or how they talk to him. But, like that one, like all those comments, he's like, oh, okay, you're going to be the one I'm going to test on, because
Right.
to see.
Right. There's also the dynamic between Vickers and David, in terms
Yes.
of, from the beginning you get the, and again, I like that the movie doesn't hand you things, it just suggests things along the way. So from the very, like, the very, when we're with the hologram, Wayland, and he says, he refers to David as the son I never had, and they cut to Vickers
Mm.
eye roll, and so you see there's this, that they don't get a lot of screen time interacting as rivals, but you can see their rivalry, throughout the course of the movie, even though it's not, like I said, sort of laid out and holding our hand saying, oh, look at this rivalry between these two characters.
That's really interesting because, yeah, at that point in the movie, we don't know who Vickers is. We just know she's like the military person in charge of the mission. And so that is interesting because, like, he says that, and then we find out she's actually Wayland's daughter. And yeah, so there is that rivalry of like not just where their placement is with him, but like also with like the company and everything. Because like Wayland created David, so he created David sort of in his image of what he
Right.
wanted.
Which, like,
And
the opening scene of Covenant explains sort of more clearly, but again, we don't have that information for this film. But it does have a, they both are in a way wanting to supplant him, or again, that whole sort of taking over from the previous generation, from your parents, and replacing them, and moving in your direction. They both have that sort of motivation throughout the course of the film that's driving them both in different ways, which is interesting to watch. Again, when you have all of that information, you come back and rewatch it. It's that part's fascinating.
I think, yeah, David is there with the secret mission of like bringing Wayland after he finds out everything's safe and doing Wayland's biddings, but I think like he's also just curious by like the engineers and like them as a species and like what they're creating there. Like it's like he kind of goes on his own little side mission of what's going on.
Yes, the allusions to I was I'm not sure I've completely wrapped my head around all of this, but there's the allusions to Lawrence of Arabia that David is
Oh,
fascinated with.
which is interesting because not only is we find David like watching it and kind of mimicking himself to look like Peter O'Toole. That apparently was one of the roles Fassbender, like one of the films he watched in preparation for the character. And I guess maybe it was in the script already because he also watched Blade Runner and
Mm,
The Man Who Fell to Earth. And I forget there was another film.
okay.
But The Man Who Fell to Earth makes sense too because he does kind of have like that androgynous Bowie type of presence on screen for
Hmm.
this character.
Yes, he does. The Yeah, I find it interesting, his fascination with that character, and then I was wondering somewhat about what Scott was saying, by pointing us in that direction. With, I mean, it could be simply, and this is a sort of a very simplistic reading of that other film, which I'm not an expert on in any way. But the idea of someone not belonging, like being outside
Hmm.
of something and being a part of it, but being an outsider, that could be, as simple as that. Um, but I also, maybe it's the, properness of the character, the Britishness of it, that sort of like, um, David being drawn to following, sort of protocol, or sort of a way of, sort of a regime of how to be in the world that maybe fits with that sort of like Britishness that it would, is definitely sort of portrayed in, a movie like Lawrence of Arabia, where he is bringing that sort of Britishness to a different part of the world, and a colonialist sort of idea. So maybe there's something there that's more complicated. Again, as I watch it, I always reflect on it, but I'm not sure I've ever really wrapped my head around, really what's Scott is saying with that reference. But it's certainly Fassbender's performance too. David is one of my favorite performances by him. If you take the two movies together, I just think he's I mean, he's an incredible actor, and he's always, again, another one of the greatest actors of his generation. And I just think he's, so incredible to watch. I love it whenever he's on screen in these movies. I
Yeah.
could just watch him forever, and just all the little things he's doing, with his character, is just so incredible to watch.
I think it's all the above of what you mentioned. And I think, Ridley Scott being a Brit himself, and I think like, that's probably one of his favorite movies, which it's a lot of people's favorite movie because it's a classic. It's great. I mean, I haven't watched it that many times, partly because it's just one of those movies you got to prepare yourself to sit down and watch because
Right.
it's long. But I think the properness of the character, how he speaks, but yeah, the outsiderness because David is not human, even though he appears to look human. And yeah, going into space exploration, the colonialism of all that. And that's obviously, as much as Americans have well, maybe not all Americans have guilt about it, but I think a lot of us do kind of have guilt. Like we kind of ingrain this as our culture, but in a way, it really isn't. Our ancestors kind of just forced
Yeah.
themselves into this
Right.
place. And that is even worse in British culture because they went all over the world trying to colonize societies. And
Yeah.
so obviously, Brits probably have guilt about that as well. So.
Well, and the Alien movies have always touched on like a number of themes, and I do think that there are ideas of sort of critiques of colonialism going on in there. So maybe there's sort of a piece of that. I mean, this movie again, if we're just focusing on this movie, I mean, it starts with the seeding of another world, right? So I mean, in a
Mhm.
way, it's looking at the idea of colonialism, and then it's the humans that then go exploring and try to I mean, eventually we know that that there will be actual colonists like in Aliens, right? Like we get to the
Mhm.
point where there's actual colonists. So I mean, it's not like the films are ignoring those themes as well. But this is sort of the start of it. And again, it comes back to what is our relationship between those people who did that, and then the resulting that, and the tension between them. We romanticize this idea of sort of this loving parental relationship, and one of the things that's great about Prometheus is the way it challenges that, and actually says, no, these people who created you, or these things that created you, are want you dead. And do how do you wrestle with that? It's similarly to how David, who is created as a tool, as a machine to work to do. I mean, humans create robots for to be our slaves, really. So
Mhm.
David's wrestling with that, right? He's wrestling with the idea of are humans, like, we treat David as a villain, and especially by covenant. But again, like, when you think about it, if I was David, maybe I would feel the same way, and maybe I would want
Mhm.
to kill these humans too. Like, maybe Skynet's not wrong. Going to another thing is like, oh, these humans that made us, they really are killing this planet, and they treat us like crap. I mean, we'd be better off without them. Like, maybe like Terminator doesn't get you to think that way, but the Alien movies do, or this movie
Mhm.
does, get us to think that maybe David's not wrong. Maybe humans are awful, and he'd be better off uh, getting rid of us. But
What other thing about Fassbender and David? The interesting thing is his name is David. So in the franchise, they've kind of gone in alphabetical order with every android character we had. So in Ian Holmes, Ash, Lance Hendrickson is Bishop, and Winona Ryder is Call. So it's like they've kind of went in a
I never put that together. Thank you for I've never noticed that. That's awesome. Thanks
uh,
for
that's kind of cool that
who's the other David in Covenant? What is his?
is there
Can,
oh God, it's
because
been a
remember
while
there's
since I've
two
seen.
there's,
Well,
hold
there's
on, let me.
Walter, right? Walter's his name. So
Oh, okay, so
they
it
didn't
didn't.
go in the E there. The
That's too
other
bad.
character Fassbender plays.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Yeah, that's too bad. But I had not put that together, so that's interesting. That's fascinating. I'm going to definitely be thinking about that as I watch these films going forward.
So the production of this movie has kind of existed for it kind of started like over 10 years before it was made. There was rumors Cameron was going to produce a fifth Alien movie with Ridley Scott directing. I think it was going to be more of a sequel in the beginning developments with Sigourney Weaver. Maybe they were going to be on Earth because we've always teased a
Right.
alien movie on Earth, and never really got it unless you count the AVP movies.
Right. Yeah. The ending of Resurrection suggests it.
Yeah. And then they halted that project because of AVP. And then I know Neil Blomkamp at one time was going
Yep.
to do a film that totally ignored 3 and 4.
Yeah.
And then, which I don't know if that would have been good or not. Judging by his record, I mean, I don't know. His movies kind of go either way.
Yeah.
But I guess they were like, "Oh, Ridley Scott, yeah, we'll let you make another Alien movie." And I think the original script had more connections to
Hmm.
the franchise, but when Damien Lindenoff got involved, they kind of changed it. And I think also because Scott was like, "I don't really want to do the same thing I've done
Right.
again. I want to do
Right.
something different."
Right.
And I think all these themes we've been discussing, and I think that's maybe what turned people off. I guess they wanted more of a popcorn or blockbustery
Right.
movie, and
Right.
Scott's like, "No, we're going to talk about mankind's existence and why
Right.
we're here and our mortality and what would you
Right.
do if you met God and like what would your
Right.
questions be and what
And
if
what
your
if
belief
God
system
slapped you down? Yeah. Yeah.
is."
I think you're right. Like, I don't know if you remember the lead up to the release of this film. The studio was really cagey about whether or not it was an alien movie at all, right? Like they
Mhm.
were, there was a lot of rumors that it was, but they weren't confirming or denying anything. Ridley talked about it as he kept using the phrase that there's an alien DNA in this movie, but it's a completely different story. Um, which I think is true inherently, but it is more directly tied to the Alien movies than I think they were letting on at the beginning. That's why it doesn't have Alien in the title, because they, and maybe they would have been more successful if they had called it Alien Prometheus instead of just Prometheus, because I think a lot of people were like, oh, this isn't an Alien movie, this is something else, and it, looks a little, maybe it looks a little 2001-ish or something, so it's going to be more, it's not going to be as much of an action movie. But and sometimes when I think about Prometheus, I do describe it as less of an action movie than other ones. But then when I watch it, I'm like, no, there's a lot of action in this. There's a lot of high tension moments and a lot of monster, madness. And but we don't. But when I'm not watching it, I don't think about it in that way. I think about it as sort of the more cerebral of any of the movies. But there's probably more than there isn't. There's more monster stuff than there might be in the first Alien movie, because it's one of the geniuses of the first Alien movies that you barely see it, and it's all about the tension created from not seeing it, right?
Mhm.
um but in this one, there is actually quite a bit of action. There's a lot of uh gore. There's a lot of monster stuff. So it's got all of that and all of the character dynamics and interrelation stuff, and then all of the big world, like, meaning of life question. It's really, I think, I actually rank it up there with Ridley's best films, because I think it is an achievement in a lot of ways, like in that he is managing to do all of those things all at once, which very few films do very well. He's made a popcorn movie that is a popcorn movie, but is also a very cerebral art house film at the same time. And I think he's pulled that off in ways that very few films manage to accomplish. I don't love it in the same way that I love Blade Runner and Thelma and Louise and Alien, but um, I respect and I enjoy it almost as much as any of those, and I respect it as much as those, because I think it is an amazing achievement for a director in his. I don't know how old he was at the time, but he was. Many directors are done their career by that point, or coasting on their career at that point, and he, as you mentioned from my tweet a year ago, he is not coasting. He is not resting on his laurels. Didn't love all of his recent films, but he is putting out really interesting work consistently. Good for him.
Yeah, and I think this was a passion project for him, and I think you're right. I think what people get frustrated is that it takes a while to get to the more monster action pack. Like it's like I think over an hour in before like stuff starts happening like in that regards because it's setting it up the themes and everything. That's just what a story does. It's
Right.
just, but if you were
Right.
wanting you want James Cameron, then yeah, this is not the movie for you. This isn't Aliens.
Right. A lot of movies will do that thing where they tease some action at the beginning. You're with like a sort of a B-roll and a monster attacks, and then you cut to the main story so that you get some of that stuff right from the get-go. And Prometheus doesn't do that. It spends its time setting up its situation, setting up its characters, really building interesting dynamics going on between all of that before you get to any of the. But I mean, Alien did that too. I think
Mhm.
if I'm remembering correctly, Alien doesn't like start with a big alien attack and then get us into sort of
Oh, we spend like Lord, there's lingering shots of just the ship. It like
yes,
it takes a while, so it's kind of
yeah,
funny, but maybe because it was the first of it. And also, I believe a lot of people, depending on their age, saw Aliens before they saw Alien.
yep,
And I mean, I know
yep,
a lot of people that prefer Aliens to Alien. To me, it's kind of hard. I slightly prefer Alien just because it's more of a horror film and I like that approach, but it's kind of hard to say one's better than the other. They're kind of equally.
right. And sometimes it does come down to what you saw first,
Mhm.
because then that sticks with you just in an emotional way that isn't about anything sort of objective, right? And that's fair too. I mean, that's what movies are, right? So I think our emotions are important to how we experience them. So fair enough. I think that you can't, that debate I was always a little. So for me, I prefer Alien to Aliens, but I totally respect people who go the other way because I think like they're both amazing films, and you know, there's nothing wrong with loving either one of them the most. But again, as I've come to appreciate the Alien franchise, I rewatched them with a friend who had never seen any of them, mostly because he was fairly horror averse, and so sort of stayed away from films like that, but had sort of gotten to the point where he could like handle some of the gore and the thrills, and so we sat down and watched them all, and like not all at once, but over the course of a few months, and just really appreciated them all for what they all offer, and that what's interesting and beautiful and horrifying about each one, and so I think it gave me a new appreciation watching them with someone who hadn't seen them for the first time. That's always an interesting way to watch something that you love, is watch it again with someone who's never seen it.
Yeah, because, their reaction could go a number of ways. And like if there's someone that knows you really well, then they're gonna be like either they're like, "Oh, I get why you love this movie," or they'll be like, "Why do you love
Right,
this movie?
right,
What
right,
what
right,
what about this speaks to you?" Because I'm not
right,
because sometimes it doesn't work. Like they're not seeing what you see. They're like, and then you have to be like, well, and then sometimes they're like, oh, okay, that makes sense. I didn't get that, but okay, thank you
right,
for telling.
right.
Uh, I think we have
Maybe.
to
Oh,
go
sorry. Go
ahead.
ahead. Oh, I was
I
just
was-
going to say, you were talking before about maybe why some of the reaction was mixed when this film came out. I think another part of it may be the ambiguity of it, is that the film doesn't make clear David as a horrible villain or the engineers as just evil monsters. Like it's not Lord of the Rings where they're, and again, I'm not to criticize Lord of the Rings, but that story takes a much different approach to telling sort of good and evil stories. And Prometheus, even more than the Alien movies that came before, um, takes a morally ambiguous tone with everybody, like the good guys and bad guys. Nobody's fully good, nobody's fully bad. And we don't get a full explanation of what the engineer's plan was and why they're doing what they're doing. And so a lot of people probably came out of that who maybe prefer a little more straightforward, who am I supposed to root for, or what is the film saying about this or that, and came out going, oh, what was that, right? And so, for people maybe who do love it, is maybe people who do appreciate that more of the, like, we before the recording, we were talking a little bit about Black Panther. Another example of a movie that has a villain whose point you can see. Maybe you disagree with how he's doing it, or the way he goes about it, but you understand where he's coming from. And I think that, again, this film does that. It gives you reason to understand David. It doesn't give you reasons to understand the engineers, but I think that's in a different way. Like, we don't really understand what's going on with them, and maybe we can't. Their society, their alien society, is so different that maybe it's one of those things that wrapping our heads around would just be, the more you try to make it understandable, the more you anthropomorphize them, right? The more you make them us, but villains. And so I think that one of the strengths of this movie for me is that you come out of it going, I'm not sure what I'm supposed to feel about things, and that's fascinating. That's really interesting.
I think that is interesting, and I think, yeah, because even in the other films, like, anyone who works for the corporation is usually bad. They're nefarious. They have ulterior motives, and the crew or whoever, they're the good guys, and this monster, the alien, is just this unstoppable killing machine. Like,
Right.
even, and I think that's probably why, like, another one like 3 is not liked, because we're stuck dealing with characters we shouldn't be
Yep.
caring or rooting for, because these are all rapists and murderers
Yep.
on the planet. And yeah, nobody in this movie is really just all out bad or all out good. Like, we could say Waylon is probably a corruptible, horrible
Yeah.
billionaire person like we know in real life, but you can also understand why someone who's at the end of their life facing death would want to be like, well, if there are answers and I could
Yeah.
extend my life because I'm not ready to die,
Yeah.
you could see why he would want to do what he does. And
Yep.
the scientists are wanting answers. They want to know, like, they want the ultimate question answered, and they'll do what they can in the name of science. And then the crew, not just Vickers, but like Idris Elba and Benedict Wong and that other guy, like, they're just there to do their job, and like,
Yep.
they don't care
Yeah.
about it, any of this. And they're like, if things are bad, we're getting out of here. Like,
Right. Right. Yeah.
I
The
care about
Alien
the
movies.
safety.
You're right. The previous Alien movies were more of a, critique of capitalism, or at least sort of the corporatization of America, that sort of thing. But this one, again, does take a more subtle, more nuanced approach to everybody, and I think that's one of the things that I'm find really fascinating about it. If I can, I will. So I don't think this is a perfect film.
No,
I think there are some parts like, I think for me, the one jarring part that sort of makes me wish that it was handled differently was the surgery scene. I feel
mm,
like when we get to that part, I'm taken out of the movie a little bit, because I feel like it happens so quickly. Like, it just,
it does.
we don't get there. Like, we don't get to her needing to rip this thing out of herself. We get there just so fast, and so I'm not 100% like, but I'm willing to forgive that part. But then the surgery happens, she gets like stapled back up again, and then she's running down the hallway seconds later. And the whole time I'm feeling myself like, the movie does so many things well, and then this one I just feel like I just can't suspend my disbelief enough to, like, if they had found a way to tell that part of the story without, I don't know. I just, that's a part of it, and that's like a nitpicky plot detail, which I always hate those kind of critiques. But here I am doing it. But it takes me out of the movie enough that I always wish, oh, I wish that this part was handled differently somehow. And I don't know what the solution would have been, so I'm not like a second guessing Ridley Scott or anything. I just,
Mhm.
um, but it takes sort of away a little bit for me from the power of the film, that it feels like there's plot points here that just get thrown into, or he needs to get to the next plot, the important plot point, and so he cheats a little bit by just doing this throwaway bit. I don't know what how to describe that part, but
It doesn't bother me, but it totally makes sense, your critique, because it does happen really fast and gets resolved really fast. The one thing that throws me out of the movie, and I wish they didn't do it, I understand why they did it, but I didn't need to see the xenomorph at the end. Like I got enough of the connections to Alien without having to see the alien, even though it's kind of like not quite the alien. I guess it's like what the
Yeah,
first design, because like I knew like the black goo,
right,
they're creating the xenomorphs, and we
right,
find out they were gonna
right.
plan to attack Earth with them. Like they
Yeah,
were creating the ultimate
I
weapon.
agree. I always sort of imagine, and I haven't read anything to confirm this or not, but I kind of imagine like it's that seems to be like a studio note that would have been given to him afterwards. It's sort of tacked on. They did it in post production afterwards. Like we need to see one of the xenomorphs, so throw one in at the end and something like that. That's what that feels like to me. I'm not sure. I agree with you. Again, it's always because I always think that I'm always like, oh yeah, this was probably not Ridley's choice to have this last moment in the movie. Um, but I don't know that. Maybe it was. Maybe he always intended for it to end with sort of, a proto xenomorph sort of first taking their first steps or something. I don't know. But to me, it doesn't feel like that's likely based on everything else that he does with the movie. It feels like that's not where he was trying to get to, but definitely the studio wanted to get there. That's what it feels like. I could be wrong.
I think you're right, because if you look at the rest of the movie, it is, and again, that is also probably because it, even though it may have not been teased in the marketing as much, and Ridley Scott in the studio kind of trying to backtrack so not to
Right.
raise expectations, but it was out there that Ridley Scott was doing another movie
Yeah. Yeah.
connected to the Alien universe,
Yeah.
and really this is kind of its own thing. It's like
Right.
barely an
Right.
Alien movie.
Right.
But as far as criticisms, I'm gonna defend something that people go around
Okay.
criticizing this movie for.
Let's
They're
do it.
like, "These people are scientists. They wouldn't be that dumb. They're acting dumb. Why are they sticking their face?" I'm like, "Okay, second off, we've just lived through COVID, so you can't tell me anybody is not
Right.
stupid enough to do something that doesn't make sense." And
Right.
also, it's the nature of these type of movies. Do you watch a horror movie and say, "What are you doing? You're stupid." You know people are gonna make bad decisions in these type of movies. That's just how the stuff happens to them because they made bad decisions.
I agree with you. I think that's I don't, I'll defend against that criticism too. I think that these people have spent, I guess in hypersleep, they've spent years getting there. They've spent their careers working towards this. There is a human element of excitement and wonder that, I mean, if anyone knows scientists, that's a big part of what all of this is. And scientists screw up all the time. Like they're human beings that, I like, you're right. Like Rafe Spall's character, as he's like really excited to see this like very terrifying looking straight snake creature coming out of the goo. There are times when I'm thinking to myself, why isn't he being more careful? I would be terrified in this moment, and he's, stupidly going right up to it. But I agree. I think it's because based on the nature of everything that's going on, he is excited and drunk on the just amazingness of it all, right? And the other guy is saying, hey, don't do that, you're being an idiot. Like it's not like the movie
Right.
doesn't like recognize, like yeah, I think you're right. I don't think that's a fair criticism of this movie. I think that
I
there's
mean, because
reasons why
John
people
Hurt
do it
sticks
the way
his
they
head
do.
right in the egg in the original Alien, right? And no one's like, "Oh, that was dumb. Why did he do that?" Like,
Yes, no, you're correct. I agree with your sort of defense of that. Another nitpick plot, and it's very plotty nitpicky, is when so we've got the two women at the end who are basically the only survivors at this point. I guess David's still around, but sort of. The and again, the movie does that. It makes the women the smarter characters, the ones who survive to the end, but they're running away from the crashing ship. And instead of running in the direction that the ship is not falling, they keep running in the direction that the ship is falling. And I'm like, why are they? That part always pulls me out a little bit too. Like Vickers should not have died the way that she did. I wanted her to have a better death than the way that she did. So that's another one of my criticisms, is that she should have just turned left and ran instead of running along the path that the ship is falling regardless. Like, anyway, so yeah, another
But
nitpicky thing,
I
but
forgot to mention this, but you know who almost they considered for Vickers, which I guess either actor would have been good in the role, was Angelina Jolie or Michelle Yeoh,
oh, interesting. Okay. It's
which I
always
could.
hard after you've seen a movie to see other people necessarily take that on. Again, both very good actors. But to me, I think I just love what I've already said. I love what Throne does with Vickers. So she's my Vickers, and I wanted her to have a better death.
Well, I think we need to talk about Naomi Rapace before we finish this
Yes,
conversation,
yes.
and I think it's really interesting they ended up going with her because there were a lot of bigger name actors they considered for this role, all around the same age as her. It was like Natalie Portman, Carey Mulligan,
Mm,
uh,
wow.
Abby Cornish, the Gemma. I forget, she's a British actress too. There was,
Gemma Chan.
yeah, she was in
Okay.
one of the James Bond movies, and I forget there was a list of like they're all around, that 25 to 30 age, I guess, at that point they were considering.
Mhm.
But I'm glad they went with her. And apparently, Ridley Scott had seen Girl with the Dragon Tattoo three
Right.
times.
So was this her first sort of American breakthrough
Well,
part? I
she
mean,
did
I know
that
that the
Sherlock
drag.
Holmes movie that
Oh,
came
okay.
out right before this, but I think this was like her, and
Okay.
it's and I don't know if it's partly because of this movie's, because it was successful, but kind of reputation that it wasn't
Yeah.
successful,
Right.
that she didn't really go on to have like a really bigger career than she
Right.
should, because
Right.
she's like the groundwork of this movie,
Yeah,
really.
no, she's very strong. And the character is a challenging one because she's not necessarily the most lovable character, but
Mhm.
but she is the centerpiece for sure. And she's the you know, again, she's the final girl, if you want to use that sort of term, right? Like literally in this case.
Right, she's not quite the badass that
Right,
Sigourney Weaver becomes, because
right.
Vickers has got a little bit more of that Ripley attitude, like, even with the scene when, the boyfriend's infected, she's like, "You just got the flamethrower. He can't come on this ship," and
Right. Yes. Well, and again, that is, I mean, that's a revisiting of that other
Mhm,
scene, right? And it's from Alien, and it's what would have happened maybe if the like. It's interesting because people talk about that scene in Alien a lot, and this movie is almost like, well, let's actually do what she was saying. Like she burns the guy alive. And then things still go wrong, right? It's almost like he's
mhm.
saying like but I thought that was interesting that he revisits that plot point so clearly, right? Like this is clearly a nod to Alien. And but now we're making it the villain, or not a villain, but someone you don't like saying it
Mhm.
instead of Ripley saying it. And we're going to have her actually succeed in preventing the infected person from coming on board, and it's going to play out differently than you think. And I think that was an interesting play by Ridley Scott. I thought good on him for pulling that on us.
But yeah, I don't say she would be Shaw's unlikable, but she's kind of a passive character through most of the movie because she's
Right.
either going by the orders of Vickers and the crew, or her boyfriend. I forget, Logan Marshall Green. Is it Holloway? Is that his name? I can't
Yeah, I think
remember.
so. Yeah, you're right. He's kind of his character is kind of that.
He kind
But
of bombards like everything they're doing, but she's very religious, and so she's kind of a nice symmetry between science and religion that we
yeah,
wish more religious people would be like.
right. Yeah, she's definitely an interesting character, and again, yeah, I didn't mean to say unlikable because that's not how I meant it, but more like she's not a character that you sort of necessarily maybe rally around in the way that a lot of sort of
True.
heroic central characters end up becoming these sort of leaders. And again, brilliant. Like Ridley Scott is not doing what everybody else does with these stories, right? And so she's perfect for that sort of role because she's still the character that we follow and that the audience is most connected to through the course of the movie. But she's not, she doesn't end up sort of taking on a big rally around me leader kind of role. She's, like I said, the smart, like the one that gets through to the end. And so she's obviously got the qualities that make her successful to the end. There is a part of me that would love to see her story between Covenant and Prometheus, because I bet that would
Yeah,
have been really interesting.
that's probably one of my biggest complaints about Covenant is I wish she was still a prominent figure in the story instead
Right,
of getting rid of her. But I feel like that movie was a compromise film.
right,
And
right.
it was like, okay, we'll let you make a sequel, but you gotta like
But
make it
it's got to
more of
be
it.
a monster movie.
It's got to be
But
more
he's
of an
still
alien movie.
right. He does do a lot of interesting things with David though throughout the course of that, and so that
That's
part,
what makes
yeah.
Covenant for me is Fassbender's
But I agree
performances.
with you that there's more of Shaw's story that would have been interesting to get, and I'm disappointed that we don't, because um, she goes through a lot of changes through this movie, and I'd love to see who she is after this, um, because her whole like I'm gonna go to these MFs and I'm gonna like that's a big different change from who she is at the beginning of the movie. And I think there's would be a lot of interesting things to get there. But the journey for her to get there is interesting. And she and her performance is great through this. I mean, she's dealing with, like I said, a complicated, difficult character that I think she does a great job on.
Two other performances I want to highlight before we kind of wrap
Yeah.
up and is Idris Elba. I
Oh,
mean, he's a great actor, love him. I think he's one
yeah.
of the truly probably the most likable character in this movie. And I
Probably.
don't know if that's just his charm as a human being and performer, but
Yeah.
I like that he's not a company man. Like he's not in charge of the mission, but he's in charge of the ship because he's the captain.
Yeah.
And like he doesn't care about their mission, but he also doesn't care about like orders. He's like, no,
Right.
stuff's going south. I care
Right.
about my crew. We're getting out of here. I don't care what your job is or what you want to do. Like the safety of my crew is what's important.
Right. I like too that I mean, you're right, he's very likable. He's charming, he's um adorable. He's you get a sense that he's a good guy, even if he's a bit of a smartass.
Hmm.
I mean, he gets a heroic death, like he goes out there and saves the day in the end. Um, so there's that, but he and then he also, I actually love the little interchange with him and Vickers, where they, have an off screen sex scene, because again, it's a way of humanizing her a bit too. Like
Hmm.
she's so in control, like she's got that tight bun for the first half of the film, and then after she has sex, her hair's down, which I think is a great little a great little comment. But it shows that she is, a human being as well. And I think that little interaction is just a little grounding, very human moment, which I really like. But it's also just a charming little interchange between the two of them.
Well, also
Um,
we're gonna put the two most attractive people in the
yes,
movie and have
that's
them
true.
be.
But again, I mean, that's like humanity, right? Like, I mean, you're on this mission and you're doing these things. You think that like, and there's like an attractive person there. It's like, no, we're not going to think about, people are not going to think about sex. No, I like that the movie actually acknowledges that these are people, are human beings, right? That have real human emotions and urges and things that are not necessarily practical. Whereas we get the other sex scene that is between the married couple, that is important to the plot because it's,
Hmm.
it gets the aliens starting the process. But that one doesn't feel as like, maybe again, it's like grounding in terms of, because they're again, this goes back to Numi's performance and how she's like, this guy is in this not great place right now. Like her husband is not a really great, It's not in the moment when maybe he's at his best. He's behaving in a way
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of shitty to a lot of people, and yet they, they have this connection. They have this long history together. They have, there's it just, it again, it felt organic. It didn't feel exploitative. I like the way that it, like, they needed it for the plot, but they did handled it in a way that I felt made you feel like this is what these people would be doing in this moment, and I appreciated that. And again, like, touching into the humanity, since we're discussing who are we and why are we here and all of these other things, like, to actually have moments where human beings are being human beings is, I think, important. So I like that.
Well,
And go ahead.
yeah, he's being horrible to like everybody because he's basically being a whiny pout baby because
Yeah.
what he wanted to do, he got disappointed.
Yeah.
But he's also being very vulnerable, and that's also because they're a couple. They've
Yeah.
have all these life experiences together, so it's like it's a realistic approach. Maybe not the most healthy time to have sex with your partner, but you could see that could happen to a couple if they were in a similar circumstances. And there's just a lot of people in this movie that should be bigger actors than they are. And the other performance I wanted to highlight was Guy Pearce, who basically this is kind of the role he kind of plays now, and to some degree. But I think he does a really good job, and then that's amazing makeup because they could have got an actor that was closer to being an older
Right.
man, and
Hmm.
but he does a great job of playing someone who's powerful but also fragile because of his not just his age but his physical and medical state of life. And I don't know how old he is, but I think he's like severely old. So like not just
Wayland,
like
you mean, not Guy
yeah, I
Pearce?
feel like
Yeah.
he's like 90 plus or something. He could be not as old, but that's what he kind of
No,
like
I
he's
think you're
already
right.
lived like.
I think the implication is that he's long past, not long, maybe long past, but definitely past the point where a lot of people have passed away.
Yeah, because he
Yeah.
wants that immortality, and he's like, "I'm rich, I can buy anything," and
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
he wants is more life.
Yeah. Well, and also he's been frozen too, or hypersleep or something. So he's, potentially extending life out that way as well,
Mhm.
to make this journey. Yeah, I think you're right. I agree. I mean, this cast is a strong cast all around, and they even have, like, then they have great, strong actors in small roles. You could even, like, point to Patrick Wilson just being in, like,
Mhm.
a very brief flashback. And I don't know if they just cast him because they wanted him to be this idealized figure in her memory. And of course, he's this, tall, beautiful man. So maybe there's, like, got that sort of traditional sort of all American look that I think that maybe they were trying to create this image in Shaw's mind of her dad being this perfect, idol for her to look up to or something. But I mean, he's in it. So I remember thinking, why did they cast him in this movie where he's in it for like 2 seconds? It's one of those kind of
Well,
roles.
I
But
mean, with a director like Ridley Scott, even though he's not really, I mean, he kind of is, but kind of isn't really like one of those big auteur name directors. But he's a big enough director that, like, if Ridley Scott asked you to be in his movie, a
right.
lot of people would be like, well, yeah, I'll do a Ridley Scott movie.
So I'll say something here about Ridley Scott. I think that he is one of the few directors who kind of can challenge Spielberg for being, like, the kind of director who makes these, like, sort of movies that are they're like mainstream, but they're art house movies at the same time. Like, I can't think of too many directors that have the kind of clout. And, like, we always sort of think of Spielberg in this, like, sort of category by himself, but I guess maybe what my hot take is that I think maybe Ridley Scott might be knocking at his door a little bit. I think he maybe has as much of that kind of power as a filmmaker to make films that both resonate in the mainstream box office, but also are of a quality that are sort of for the ages, right? working today anyways. You might be able to go back in the past and get some of those directors, but I think there's few that sort of straddle that line so well as Spielberg and Scott.
I think he is pretty close. I think the only difference is Spielberg hasn't really done ever a director for hire job.
Man,
Like even some of Spielberg's so-called failures, they were some sort of subject that fascinated him. And I think
right.
even some of the stuff Ridley Scott's done that doesn't really feel like his wheelhouse, he was fascinated by, but he does tend to do a lot of projects
That's true.
just just to work.
Right,
But
right.
this is one of the movies I think that he was passionate about making, and it shows. I mean, I
Well, on
watched
this, yep, go ahead.
I watched the Blu-ray a couple of days ago, and it just looks beautiful. And I don't know if it's the movie itself, my TV, because the Blu-ray is fairly old. I bought it like when it first came out, but it just looked amazing.
Yeah, I should have done that. I watched it on Disney Plus, and I probably shouldn't have because I'm not sure what the. I mean, it was fine. I enjoyed it, all the rest of it. But you're right. I've got the Blu-ray sitting there. I think I was just too lazy to go get it and put it in, so I just called it up on Disney Plus. But I'm not sure what what they have online in terms of their transfer and everything. Right. So maybe I should have put in the not been so lazy and actually put the Blu-ray in. I was going to say though that I think that Prometheus is one of those films that like in film circles we talk a lot about franchises and how they affect sort of cinema overall, and I think that Prometheus is one of those films that straddles the line between like it's showing maybe what can be great about franchises in terms of what strengths they can really bring to making interesting films, while also being part of that the whole, right? um, because it's really easy to just sort of dismiss big blockbuster series, whether it's Marvel or Star Wars or whatever. But it's nice, like I think sometimes there can be strengths that come along with being part of those series, that and I think a movie like Prometheus shows what you can do really well with it.
Yeah, like just because something is in a big franchise film that is supposed to entertain the masses doesn't mean you can't do something interesting
That's
and
right.
have something to say other than let me shove popcorn down my mouth for 2
Right.
hours.
And build on what's been there before, but not in a way that takes away. So when I like sequels that do add to the experience of other movies, right? Like that like I defend Rogue One by saying one of the critiques of Star Wars was always that it was so easy for the rebels to destroy the Death Star, and I think Rogue One, one of its strengths is that it gives you a good reason for that. So things like that like whether it's, and that's a simple example, but I really feel like Prometheus enriches the Alien franchise with adding mythology and ideas to it that weren't there before. But then when you go back and watch the other movies, it contributes to your experience of watching those movies. And that's what I like about a good prequel or sequel or part of a franchise, when it enriches the experience of the others.
Well, yeah, it enriches for the first film of like how those eggs got there on LV-426, which is not the planet they're on in Prometheus, but probably these space jockeys, engineers were in various different stages developing this, and maybe they went to different planets
Right.
to create these creatures. Also has the connection of why the Wayland Yutani Corporation is fascinated by this sort of
Right.
creature.
Right.
So it's all there. It's like it all lays the groundwork of what is in the franchise, but also
Yep.
building, like you said, the mythology and lore of it, like making it even more enriched than just a monster movie.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And the score, I love the score to this movie.
Me too. I actually think it's my favorite of the franchise. The Alien movies are not high on my list of they're high on my list of most things, but not when it comes to score. But I think that Prometheus is the one that I enjoy the most.
Yeah, I would think the only other one that kind of rivals it is James Horner's from Aliens, but I prefer this
Mm,
one.
mm,
And I think Horner's score just kind of goes with the speed of the movie, like the adrenaline rush that
mm-hmm.
Aliens is.
Right.
Which this movie is a tad bit of an adrenaline rush, but not in the same way.
No, no, not until near the end.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I do really enjoy the score in this movie a lot. It's one of those ones that sort of sits with you a little bit afterwards. Like that's one of the sort of the sometimes that's one of the tests for me around scores is after the movie, am I hearing it play in my head, right? And this one definitely
It's very
has that quality.
haunting
Hmm.
and has a lingering of not just horror, but like a little feels like it could be like in a folk tale sort of thing.
Interesting, yeah. Hmm.
And what's interesting is I think Guillermo del Toro saw this movie and was like, "Oh, this is kind of what I was going to do with At the Mountain of Madness. This is kind
Oh,
of what,
really?
yeah,
Interesting.
this is kind of the similar
Still a movie I
threads."
wish we could see.
Yeah, I really want now that he's won an Oscar, I really wish he would just see who would let him finance it,
Yeah,
even if it went to streaming. Like, just be
yeah,
like, "This is my time to make this movie."
yeah. I'd
But
love that too.
I would very much like to see because I think Ridley Scott did want to make one more of these. I'm not sure if it's going to happen now that Disney owns the
Yeah,
franchise and they're developing a TV series with Noah Hawley
right.
for FX.
Yeah, and I don't know where they're going with that. If it will be where it will be set. Will it be set after Resurrections? Will it be set sometime in another part of the timeline? I mean, that could impact it a lot because if they want to, go later, like I said, like who knows, or maybe it'll just be sort of similar. Maybe they'll do a thing where it's a similar, like, I mean, maybe the Nostromo wasn't the only ship that the corporation diverted to one of these worlds, and maybe it'll follow that sort of a story. Who knows? Like, there's all kinds of ways you could go with this. I do kind of imagine it will be more of a straight up xenomorphs running around killing people kind of a story. It's just okay. I don't have any problem with that. But there's a part of me that thinks this might be one of those things. I mean, Ridley's getting pretty old, but there is one of those, it could be one of those things where eventually, again, the nostalgia kicks in and people are like, let Ridley do his final, we want to see Ridley do his final chapter. And enough time has passed that maybe some of the disappointment that, again, not a lot of us didn't have, but much of the audience had around Prometheus and Covenant will, go away and be forgotten, and then it can sort of come back. Like sometimes these things just take a while for them to have enough of a following. Like, whether it's Hocus Pocus, which again was poorly received when it came out, but became this cult classic as people just watched it every Halloween and got into the camp of it, and now we have a sequel, and so it could be that sort of thing where enough time passes and they decide to bring him back for one more. But the problem is that we don't know how much longer Ridley Scott's going to be making movies. At
Mm-hmm.
this point, it feels like he could make them for the next 20 years the way he's going. So who knows?
He's
I
his
hope
own
so.
Wayland, just making movies. Him
That's
and Clint
right.
Eastwood just keep cranking them out.
I would be sad about that if he just kept working and making them, because again, even when I don't like them, I usually don't hate them. I usually get something out of them, like whether it's like All the Money in the World, which I'm not sure it's a film I would like revisit over and over again, but I remember just finding it really fascinating in a lot of ways when I was
Okay.
watching it.
I have not watched that one yet.
Hmm.
That's one I haven't seen yet. So when
I
I
was gonna say
finally
you're
want,
gonna get to it soon, right? You're going
yeah,
through all of his.
yeah, we'll eventually cover it. We got about 7 more of his movies to watch, and there's only 2 I haven't seen before, and one I'm not really looking forward to watching.
Oh yeah, which one's that?
Exodus.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, that one I'm not
yeah,
looking forward to visiting because it's like, oh, why is there all
yeah,
white people in this
yeah.
movie that takes
And it's
place in
also just,
Egypt?
I don't know. I haven't. I only saw it the one time, but I remember coming out of it. I mean, there's that critique for sure, but there's also just this wasn't that interesting of a movie. But I mean, maybe you'll enjoy it more. Who knows? Um, but yeah, you're right. he's one of my favorite directors. I'm always excited to see what he comes up with, but there's been times when I've walked out of his movies and been like, damn. So yeah.
Well, this has been a really fascinating and deeply good conversation about a movie that I think people should revisit because there's more to it than what maybe it may be now that since you got away from it not being quite an alien movie, maybe you'll appreciate it more and maybe you'll see why like what's good about Alien Covenant is what was the pieces in this movie and like what's not good about it was trying to connect it to the other films. But is there anything else you want to bring up about Prometheus?
I don't think so. I think we've covered most of it. I mean, I get we it's interesting the title. I always sort of think about sort of what is he saying there, and I like the idea of this idea of how the Greek character was sort of the source for putting humanity in conflict with the gods, and I think that that's a
Mm-hmm.
lot of what sort of he's sort of saying by choosing that as the name of the ship and the title of the movie. Again, just I I feel like every time I watch this film, and I have watched it a number of times now, I and movies that fall in franchises, just I get to watch them more often because I'll get on a kick where I watch through a series again. So I see the Lord of the Rings movies and the Alien movies more often than maybe I revisit some of my other favorite movies. But every time I watch it, I find more stuff to reflect on that is just interesting and ask myself questions about things that it's a great jumping off point, not just for conversation if you're watching it with other people, but for reflection with for yourself. And I think that's one of the reasons why I think this is up there with some of the stronger movies in this series, but also just in general. So thank you so much for letting me come on to talk about this one. I'm glad I got a chance to do it.
Yeah, I really appreciate it, especially when someone's really passionate about a movie like this, because this is kind of a movie where passions go one way or the other. So I guess we'll rank this based on the ratings I created for Ridley Scott. So Ridley Scott has an art background. He did commercials. So if you love this movie, you think it's great. You think it's kind of a masterpiece in what it's doing. It's a work of art. If you think it's entertaining, it hits its marks. It does its job of what a movie's supposed to do. It's constructually sound. There's always a deep dive, and that's more for fans or cinephiles. Maybe it's a bit of a cult following, which this movie, I guess, kind of could fall in that category. Um, if it's a little mediocre, doesn't come up to snuff with what they were trying to do, it's a nice pat on the back, good effort. And then if it's just a horrible train wreck, just didn't come together at all, it's a mess of a film. Well, it only belongs on Ridley's mommy's fridge then.
Right. Okay, so for me, I probably would lean towards the constructionally sound, like the second tier, but I actually think it might exceed that a little bit. So I don't think it's up there with Alien, Blade Runner, Thelma and Louise, like some of his ones that I would outright call masterpieces, works of art. But at the same time, I think it's more than just a competent film. So somewhere in that range is sort of where I'd place it.
I'm gonna have to agree with you. It's not quite a great movie, but I think there's enough there that it's more than an above average movie. So
Yeah,
it's somewhere lingering in a ranking in between those two. Like
yeah,
I think I gave this 4 stars on Letterbox because
right.
it's not quite a 4.5 or 5 star movie.
Fair enough.
I think he undeniably has made 4 masterpieces in his life. And I think there's about probably 5 to 6 movies that linger somewhere between that 4.5 and 3.5 star rating for
Yeah,
me with him.
yeah. I think that's 4 stars out of five is a good place to land for this one for sure. There are things about it for sure that I critique. It's not as much of a favorite for me as some other ones, but it's still a film that every time I watch it, I really appreciate just what an achievement it is in a lot of ways.
Well, for previous directors, we did I ranked the films, but because there's so many of these films, I think what I'm going to initiate now with directors, and if they have less amount of movies, I may just do 5 instead of 10. But for Ridley Scott, I think I'm going to petition what 10 movies, if we were building a Ridley Scott Hall of Fame, should be in there. And I very much think this one should be in there because I feel like this is definitely one of those films that's undeniably him.
I think it would get into the top 10. I think so too. It probably wouldn't be in the top 5, but it would be
No,
in the
I
top 10.
I have a pretty, like I said, I think he has a strong top 4, and there's one I would think that I would defend passionately should be in his top 5. But I think maybe some people would put some more of
Yeah,
his more successful films, but there's
right.
one that I think belongs in his top 5. And if you've seen the director's cut of it, you probably know which movie I'm talking about.
Are you gonna leave us hanging? Which one is it?
Kingdom of Heaven. I think Kingdom
Okay,
of
I've never
Heaven,
seen the director's cut, so I should make a point of watching that.
because I think the director's cut is rivals Gladiator, but Gladiator is such a more traditional,
Right.
just right down the middle movie that everyone can be like, I can get behind this story and love it because, yeah.
Right. It's an easy movie to love for sure. I'm
Well,
just doing Just Watch to see where I can stream Kingdom of Heaven. Oh, it looks like it's on Disney Plus. Great. Probably not the director's cut though, so I'm gonna have to track that down.
yeah, and it's quite long. It's like almost an hour longer or over an hour longer than the original cut of the movie.
Okay. All
Because
right.
there's
So
like
yeah.
a whole subplot with Eva Green and she has a son, and yeah.
Okay.
But
Well, I
it's a
will
really
have to track
strong
that
film
down.
with that, and it's got like a overture and a intermission. Like he really went all out with like making it a classical
Wow, like epic.
epic.
Yeah, okay. Interesting. Well, I will definitely try to track that down because, again, as someone who claims to be a Ridley Scott fan, I haven't seen Kingdom of Heaven since it came out, so I need to revisit it for sure.
That is probably the only other one besides Blade Runner where I feel like the director's cut is actually, almost a different movie, because a lot of his extended cuts or director's cut doesn't really
Sure.
change the movie for me. Well, I guess
Right.
Legend a little bit too, but
I've never seen, I don't think I've ever seen the director's cut of that one.
it's a different score. It's Jerry Goldsmith instead of
Hmm.
Tangerine Dream, and it doesn't have like the romancy ending. Like Jack goes
Interesting.
back into the wilderness and stuff.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a
Wow,
little
that's a film
more.
I haven't revisited for a long time, so I might have to do that too.
Yeah,
But you're right.
but
A lot of times, director's cuts don't necessarily lead to a better movie, but other times they really do. So, I mean, uh, yeah, there's a number of examples we could get into, but we go on forever. So, but thank you again for letting me talk about this movie, and it's always so much fun to chat with you about films.
absolutely, you're always welcome, and I appreciate you taking time, changing the scheduling for me,
It's all
and
good.
yeah, thank you for coming on and passionately. Well, I wasn't against the movie, but passionately giving your defense of a movie that some people kind of brush to the side when like there's more to it than what the criticism of it of saying it's not a good movie is.
Yeah, thank you.
Enjoy the rest of your day and your extended weekend as you
Thank
have a
you.
holiday in Canada.
Thank you.
And yeah, just let me know what movies I need to check out because sports season's coming and you're getting to see some of these movies early.
Yeah, I definitely will.
All right. Appreciate it. You have a great day and thank you
Thanks.
again.
Thank you.
Bye.